Hello and welcome back to the RevOps Show. Is it the end of the year yet? We're all starting to feel that a break is much needed, and it's only the middle of March. I can only hope that you're taking a much needed break as you listen to this episode. Anyways, getting into the overview of today's episode, Doug and Jess are talking about, drum roll please, baseball. Again, just kidding. Only slightly though. They do talk about it, but the main focus for today is on ideal client profiles, why you need them, what they are, where you should start, and so much more. Doug has a hot take on the topic that you aren't going to want to miss, so be on the lookout for it and let's get into it.
Jess.
Doug.
Is it 2023 yet?
Feels like it.
Oh my God.
Man,
we got to be coming up on the end of the year. I mean, it's got to be around the corner.
Not quite.
You know how I guess we can call it, I guess it's officially now called the week of rest. That's what companies that are doing this now. You know, we've had the week of rest before the week of rest was cool, by the way.
Mm-hmm,
you know how
we
have that at the end of the year every year. And you know how I say, you know, in a fast growth company, a day's a week, a week's a month, a month's a quarter, and a quarter's a year. Maybe we need to move to a week of rest every quarter.
I am down for that. Let's do it. I
don't know if our clients would necessarily be.
I don't think it would be. I don't think it would work for client retention at all. No.
Could you imagine if we were in a week of rest right now?
No one knows what's going on right now, but
I know.
Oh, I'm taking a week of rest next week. This is my heads up to you.
Okay, so we are in December. This is the second to last week of December. Is that
it? Is
we're there already?
It is. We are. In my mind, it feels like it.
But you know, Jess, I do have good news for you today.
What's the good news?
Baseball is back, baby.
I was worried about you. With no baseball. I was very concerned.
Yeah, my
relieved.
quotient probably would have gone up in internal meetings had there not been baseball, because now I can get that out watching games.
This is true. You're wearing your Reds hat today.
I am. It's a nice hat, don't you think? I've always liked the Reds logo, but
same, but I'm biased because I'm a Reds fan.
I know.
So
well, you know, I was before the Expos. I rooted for the Reds. I was, you know, big Red Machine. And, you know, it's probably because, I mean, you know, that whole lineup was just amazing. But also, if you remember, those were the World Series. They were against the Yankees, and I hated the Yankees.
I think that's why everybody loved him, because everybody hates the Yankees. So if you're not a Yankees fan, who do you root for?
So, but I can still get most of that lineup. Johnny Bench catching, Tony Perez at first, Joe Morgan at shortstop, Dave Concepcion at short. It was pre-Ray Knight. I know who the third baseman was, but I can't think of him. It was Cesar Geronimo in center field, George Foster in right field. So apparently the left side is where I'm weak. I can't remember who the left fielder was. I actually think it was a platoon.
And I should know this because my dad has he's got a baseball signed by each member of the Big Red Machine.
Gosh, who was the third baseman in 77 for the Reds? Somebody, whoever's listening to this podcast, Mom, actually my mom can't look up on Google anymore. Somebody look it up and tell me who played third base and left field for the 1977 Cincinnati Reds. Anyways, isn't that amazing that I'm not a Reds fan and I can tell you
that is pretty incredible.
When I was a kid, elementary into junior high school, I don't know if it stayed through high school, I could tell you the starting lineup for every team in Major League Baseball.
That's impressive.
Every team.
I wonder, that's a lot of headspace that's taken off.
Is that why my grades weren't very good?
Probably.
You know, funny story. You know, my mom would take me to Orioles games. My mom and dad would take me. We'd go to Orioles games, and you know they still do today. But this is the old scoreboards that barely could show anything. But they'd have you know what their batting average was, at bats, hits, you know, etc. And because I was struggling in school, I have I'm a SLRD, I'm other things, dyslexic, etc. But so it's like I really struggled in math. And to this day, I still can't show my work in math, but I'm obviously really good with numbers. And so, someone would get a hit in their first at bat, they'd come up for their second at bat, and I would say something like, "Oh, well, their batting average is, whatever now," or and I would say what the batting average was, and my mom would be like, "What? Well, how do you know that?" I'm like, "Well, he was this for this before, and he just got a hit, so he's now that for that," and my mom would go, "But I thought you were bad at math."
If they could only translate all math to baseball,
Well,
you would have been
again, I
amazing.
could do it in my head. I'd say, my mom would say, "But I thought you were bad at math." And I'm like, "Well, I am bad at math." And she goes, "Well, what you just did was math." And I said, "No, that's batting averages."
So the topic for today is not baseball. Shockingly.
Wait, I've been misinformed. Okay, what's the topic today, Jess? I guess you're done talking baseball.
Dan played third, by the way. I texted my dad, and
Who?
Geronimo, Dan Drizzen played third.
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't.
Geronimo played right.
Oh, Geronimo played right?
And I'm sorry, my dad is probably the authority on
Who was
this.
the center fielder?
Let me text him. Stay tuned, everybody, for who the center fielder was.
Geronimo didn't play center at all?
I don't know.
I believe your dad. I believe it.
He'll probably respond in a minute. I just asked
him. Is your dad impressed that I'm asking you about Cincinnati 1977?
Yeah, he asked how this originated. I did tell him it was on a podcast, so he'll be very pleased that we're talking about this. All right.
Finally, I understand what you do.
Exactly. All right. So what I want to talk about today is ideal client profile. This has come up in a few places on the podcast, and you like to talk about the fact that people think it does. And you like to reference the fact that people think they have ideal client profiles, and it's not in fact an ideal client profile.
For the record, I say many people think they have an ideal client profile. Many realize that they don't, or many don't have anything approaching an ideal client profile. But oftentimes what people call an ideal client profile is not really an ideal client profile.
Okay. So what is an ideal client profile?
Well, I think, if I may hijack the show.
Why not?
Before we can talk about what is an ideal client profile, I think we have to talk about why an ideal client profile.
Why an ideal client profile? Okay. Why an ideal client profile?
So I believe firmly, and actually on one of the other podcasts, I mentioned this, and it got misinterpreted by somebody who was really who I have a lot of respect for. So I'm going to give a little bit of a further explanation. I believe firmly that the most important question that a company or an organization can ask itself and answer on a daily basis is, who do we want to be a hero to? Or, in the words of Dr. Seuss, who's your who? I don't know if Dr. Seuss ever said that, but I think that would be something that if he heard, he would say, yeah, I would say that.
Very Seussian. Very Seussian.
Who's your who? Simon Sinek has his golden circle, and he says, start with why. Why, how, what? I say Simon Sinek is wrong. Start with who. And by the way, I don't think you can really have a why without a who. Now, you can have your own internal why. Why do you rally? Why do you bring, but for it to really mean something in the market, and the two most common, if not the most often and most popular, or if not the most often cited, I don't know if Simon says these are his central examples or if they're just the most popular, but he talks about Apple and he talks about Southwest, mm-hmm. and how their why is what drove them. But both of them had very, very clear who they were built for, who they were building for, that made the why relevant, right? Yep. Southwest started by defining their customer as the traveling salesperson in Texas who can't be home at night to have dinner with their kids. Right. And so when people used to insult Southwest by calling them, oh, Southwest, that's the Greyhound of the skies. Herb Keller said, yeah, I know. Isn't it great?
Yep.
Right. So I don't think that you can have strategy without who. And again, ideal client profile is the peak who do you want to be a hero to? Now realize you are not the hero. Your customer is the hero. I'm not saying once you get going, and as you know, Jess, I'm a big fan of the idea Luke Skywalker is the hero. You are not Luke Skywalker. You are Yoda. Whoever the business, the provider is, you're Yoda.
Yep.
Luke Skywalker is the hero, but I would make the argument confidently that to Luke Skywalker, Yoda was Luke Skywalker's hero.
Right.
Right. So that's what I'm talking about. Again, you're going to, and by the way, this gets to enabling. So strategy is making decisions, a guiding policy to address a diagnosis to achieve an objective, and decisions are all about trade-offs. And so I believe that from a marketing and messaging standpoint, unequivocally, factually, from a marketing and messaging standpoint, you can't market or message without a clear ideal client profile. I got asked a question a couple of weeks ago. Well, what do you think our website should say? And I said, well, describe your ideal client profile. And they said, well, we don't really have one yet. We're working on it. I said, okay, well, as soon as you're done with that, then we can begin to talk about what your website should say.
Yep.
Because if you don't have that, right, then the only thing you can define yourself by is yourself. Right? You can't define yourself by your why. You can't even really define yourself a whole lot by your how. You can only define yourself by your what. And you can only distinguish and differentiate or whatever by your what. And you're going to be commoditized. I don't like, you can't have good strategy without empathy. Empathy is, understanding, what is different here.
Yeah.
And if you think about it from a revenue operations perspective, revenue operations goes wrong when we're optimizing for how we sell. We have to optimize for how people buy. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to follow the path that they naturally follow. Right. But we've got to enable to, and actually, you know what? We've got to enable to how people decide.
Yep.
Which involves how we provide. So it's decide and provide. I'm going to try to rhyme today. And the point here is that I can't only optimize for you, because if I'm optimized only for you, then I've got a job to do. It's got to be a win for me too. Right. So your ideal client profile is in so many different ways the center point of, who are we solving for? Revenue operations is to solve for revenue optimization, revenue acceleration, and customer, solve for the customer. Well, if you don't know who your customer is, you can't solve for them.
Yep.
And you can't solve for every customer. Right. Solve for the customer doesn't mean the customer gets whatever they want. It doesn't mean the customer is always right. It's far more meta than that, but you can't determine what is the optimal process. You can't figure out what is the trade-off if you don't have a real, clear, full understanding to who your ideal client profile is. And I see people all the time that the difficulty is, and by the way, if you don't have it clear, you don't have empathy, which means what you design for is yourself.
Yeah.
Or a great line. Marcus Andrews, got to give him credit. He I think it was on LinkedIn. He's more a LinkedIn guy. Actually, a valuable thing on LinkedIn. Who would have thought? He wrote, pineapple is my favorite food, but when I go fishing, I use worms. A lot of marketers miss that concept.
Oh, yeah.
What a great way to frame it, right? I don't care what works for you. Now, I'm not saying it has to work for them and not for you. It has to be. So by the way, so if you don't like putting worms on hooks, then I would say you should probably not go into that line of business.
Right.
Right. Or, hire somebody to manage the worms for you. One of the two. But so the why of the ideal client profile is that everything, operationally, innovation, messaging, sales, everything should come from that ideal client profile. That is what it means. Who is out there saying we're not customer centric?
No one.
right? Not no one that I can think of, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the electric company is still, but I mean, Comcast probably still is, but
Yeah.
But everyone says, oh, we're customer centric. Well, you
Right.
can't be customer centric if the ideal client profile isn't clear, because if the ideal client profile isn't clear, you can't center around it, right? And so why ideal client profile is because everything comes from that, because you're solving for them and you're solving for revenue acquisition, revenue management with them. And so if I don't know who, like, if I'm working with a governmental entity versus an entrepreneurial startup, the light is two completely different things. The way I'm going to monetize is completely different, etc. So that is why ideal client profile.
Makes sense. So what is an
Have you
ideal?
found out who the center fielder was yet?
He hasn't responded yet.
Okay. All right.
Everybody's waiting with bated breath. So what is an ideal client profile?
It's a detailed description of that outlines the demographics, psychographics, trends, profiles. I mean, it's an empathetic abstract of who you want to be hero to. Now, we're going to be talking about this from a B2B context, where that ideal client profile is an organization. If we're talking about B2C, your ideal client profile and your personas are very, very, very similar, if not the same thing. I know we're going to get into that difference later, but it's a detailed profile of that ideal client profile that highlights and creates distinctions between ideal, 1 degree out, 2 degree out. And what I would also say that ideal client profile, and I in many ways, I think the most important part of a strong ideal client profile is not only does it create a clear articulation. I don't think what I'm about to say, I'm not saying you have to document this next thing, but in your definition of the ideal client profile, it should be very clear who is not your ideal client. And in there, you have ideal clients, and I'll get to this. You can have some segments or even tiering of ideal clients, of an ideal client profile. So you have your ideal client profile, you have not ideal client profile, and you have not, outside of, right?
Yep.
And so one of the things that happens with your ideal client profile, and a lot of people struggle with this concept. I look at the world from a go-to-market standpoint and from a sales and marketing standpoint through two groups, right? There's a group that I sell to. There's a group that I'm happy to let buy, right? The ideal client profile is who I sell to, right? That's the group that they don't know it yet, but they need to be working with us, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones who I build for. They're the ones who we design for. They're the ones, we disproportionately allocate resources, attention, etc., to that ideal client profile. I mean, to that core. That's who I'm selling to. Now, as people move outside of that ideal client profile, and look, there's no 100%. We may get into this. I'm a big fan of creating an ideal client profile rubric that hey, they meet, they're great matches on these elements. They're a little bit off here. Everybody is different. Every organization is different. You need to account for that. By the way, that's another mistake that gets made. We treat it as, binary, you are or you're not. It really is a degree of.
Yep.
But then, my messaging is designed to appeal to that group. And in many ways, like, I want to appeal to that group and that group alone. And, it's scary because we used to say our ideal client profile, one key element of our ideal client profile was organizations that were hiring, parens, or rehiring their first salesperson. And we used to have like this really cool specialization. And it's actually really cool when we were focused there, which was that entrepreneurial organization where the entrepreneur had been selling everything, and now they needed to actually hire a salesperson. So many mistakes get made. It's so difficult. It's so right. And so we understood that, and that's what we messaged to. And you know what? It cost us appeal to somebody that had 15, 20 salespeople.
Yeah.
Let alone right now we've moved and today, and I'm going to tell you right now, like I'm going to say this publicly on the podcast, and I'm not going to lie, I'm swallowing a little bit because we work with companies that have 5 salespeople. We do great work. Heck, we work with some companies that have 1 or 2.
Yeah.
But we work with companies that they have 5 salespeople. They're profitable. They're good to work with, etc. But today, our ideal client, you have 25 to 50 salespeople. I'm going to say our ideal client profile is 50 to 150 salespeople.
Yeah.
Right now, I want you to know, saying that out loud, it scares me. It's 50 to 150. You hear me wanting to say 25.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm a little bit worried that if I say 50, then the people with 15 or 20 are going to be, and the people with 15 or 20, by the way, what I find is once you get above about 10, that's where the complexity really,
Yep.
Jumps so there's not like, we still have those, we can still solve those core elements. The economics still work, etc.
Right.
But the reality is, if you're 50, you're in a different place. You've got, at 50, you not only have sales leadership, you have true sales leadership. Like if you have 7 salespeople, you don't have true sales leadership. Your VP of sales is selling. Now,
Yep.
some people that have 50 have a VP of sales that's selling. And one thing that I would tell them is, yeah, that's probably a mistake. But you have multiple managers at 50.
Yeah.
Right? Not 1 or 2, multiple. Right. And so that becomes an element. And so all those things begin to morph. And, we have, our profile is a whole lot more than that. But like, that's the scary part. So we start saying, hey, you know what, to message to 50, to design to 50, to build to 50. Well, that means we're not building for 5. I actually had a conversation with somebody who was really interested. They referred to us. They were really interested. They had 1 or 2 kind of sort of pseudo salespeople, but it was really very much of that, the entrepreneur was still responsible for 80, 90% of sales. And what I said to him was, I said, you know what? I just can't help you today. And the reason is, 7 or 8 years ago, I lived in the problem that you had. I was totally immersed in it. I said, the problem is today, I still know a lot about it.
Right.
We, as a result of that, we probably still know more than just about anybody, but I'm not paying attention to the nuances and how is digital really changing this element and what's here and what's there. Right. And then what's more is the team that we're hiring and what we're teaching them and the systems that we have in place and all those things, those are out of alignment for what that need is.
Yep.
And so it's like, and I mean, it was like, kindred spirit, would have been really fun to work with, all those things were in place, but that's where you get, so when you think about what is the ideal client profile, Jess, have you ever gone bowling?
I have.
So when you're at the top of the lane
and
you have that ball in your hand, what is your goal? What is your objective?
To hit the front pin.
Well, you want to know, that's actually not your objective. I think your objective is you want to knock over all 10 pins.
I want to knock over all 10
right?
pins.
Isn't that whatever? Right? I want to strike.
Yes.
To bowl a strike, you got 10 pins. Do you aim at all 10 pins?
No.
How many pins do you aim at?
1.
And I used to say 1, and then I was doing that at a seminar, a workshop, and someone who was they weren't actually a semi-pro bowler, but they were kind of like that, like, year-round bowling leagues, etc. He explained to me it's actually 1.5.
Yeah.
What you want to do is you want to hit that pocket between the head pin and the 2 or the 3 pin, right?
Yeah.
And by hitting that pocket clearly, distinctly with momentum, that generates the momentum, and that's how you expand. By the way, this is a Jeffrey Moore concept. If anybody's followed Jeffrey Moore's stuff, he calls it the bowling alley. I'm all in with the bowling alley. The ideal client profile is defining your head pin. What is that head pin segment, right? How clearly do you find that head pin? How do you know when your ideal client profile is done? Well, if you ever think it's done, you're in trouble because it's never done, right? It's always tweaking. It shouldn't be changing dramatically. You can't run a business if it's changing dramatically. Your ideal client profile is a major element. I would say your ideal client profile, your economic model, and your capital structure. Those are the three things that come to mind. That is the core of the context to manage the trade-off decisions that you make. And maybe capital structure is part of economic model. Depends how you think about that.
So why do you say that a lot of people think they have an ideal client profile and then realize they don't? Like, what are some of the misconceptions about ideal client profile?
I mean, this is where ideal client profiles have a similarity. And I will sometimes say an ideal client profile is your company persona.
Mm-hmm.
I worry about that because it doesn't, like, if you follow that, you'll go off track. But your ideal client profile, it's not a sales aid. It's not a marketing aid. Remember, it's up there at your economic model and your capital structure. It's about everything.
Yeah.
So the depth of it, the detail of it, we sell to doctors' offices that have 2 to 10 physicians. Okay, awesome. That's a really good first bullet of your ideal client profile. But it's not an ideal client profile, right? That's only demographic. There's
Mm-hmm.
no psychographics. There's
okay,
no
so
context. There's no.
I was going to ask what it was missing. So psychographic.
Here's the question. I mean, I say this on personas.
Mm-hmm.
If you read a persona and you don't get a picture of the person, like, you're now having a conversation, like, can you have a real life make-believe conversation with your persona? Right? Their idiosyncrasies.
Yeah.
Right? Most personas don't go deeply enough. So a segment is not an ideal client profile. Right? A segment is a step to an ideal client profile, but your ideal client profile is a it is a them-centered description of. So, like, I'll ask people, describe, what makes the best customer? They pay their bills on time. Okay, great.
Yeah.
But that's about you.
Right.
So when you have that, what you have to do is you have to say, what's the indicator? What about them would indicate that they would be more likely to pay their bills on time? They're in a financially strong position. They have high, strong cash flow, right? They're premium. They're a premium provider. We had one company that totally freaked out about this. That they described, you can't just be run of the mill. You have to value your people. You have to see a difference because they provided training. And so it was, you can't, the ideal client profile indicated that you're looking at premium non-commodity providers. Well, the largest company in the space is an absolute mill, right? And they were like, oh my God, we can't say that. And by the way, they were a customer.
Yeah.
Right. Oh no, we can't say that. That they're the largest revenue opportunity out there. Well, hold on a second, right? You can't be premium. We believe, people are not replaceable to,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which one? So they're happy.
Yeah.
So there's lots of physicians' offices with 2 to 10 doctors. Okay, great. Well, what begins to say physicians with 2 to 10 doctors don't fit that profile?
Right.
Right. So that's probably the biggest. You don't go deeply enough to connect the dots to you. So I say it's customer centered, but it has to connect to your key elements. So for example, how much money do they spend? Right. So one of the common questions I'll ask is, what does a good customer spend with you a year?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. Right. I know it depends, but what is a good customer? And by the way, your ideal client profile is your core. It's not your outliers. Well, some people spend as much as $100 million with us. Okay. What percentage of companies spend $100 million with you? 0.25%. Okay, great. That's not ideal client profile. We can weave them out. They're an outlier. So we come up with that number. Now, hopefully someone's listening to this and saying, but Doug, that's about you. It's not about them. So then here's what I ask. So let's say a good customer spend $500,000 a year with us. By the way, you notice I said $500,000 a year. Well, that says they have a repeat purchase pattern.
Yeah.
Right. Might be, well, they spend $500,000 with us every 5 years, or again, it could be, or they spend $500,000 with us and we may never see them again.
Yep.
You know, in all this world of recurring revenue, people sometimes forget there are a lot of companies that make a lot of money that sell stuff and people may or may not buy from them ever again. But so they spend $500,000 a year with us. Okay, great. What about a company puts them in the position where they would be spending $500,000 on this? Right. So it might be how many people? So you're selling SaaS software that's seat-based and it's X dollars per. And so to get $500,000, you have to have this many people in this role. You have to have a certain amount of revenue. You know, we worked with a company in the marketing space. We asked that question. One of the things we pointed out to them was what they thought their ideal, you know, what their best segment was way too small. They were basically looking for, you know, they wanted to get contracts for what would be the typical marketing spend, not the fraction of the marketing spend that they were responsible for. So you're reverse engineering back and forth to connect the dots and say, what's the match between this situation and us? What's their situation like? What's wrong with their status quo? Right? If you don't have an ideal client profile, if you're not describing the problem, right? I don't think you can differentiate yourself today on your solutions. I think solutions are just too commodified. They're too close. There's too much good enough.
Yeah.
I think where you can differentiate yourself, where you can draw a distinction is what's the problem that you're solving, right? So, physician groups with 2 to 10 that are growing to 50 to 100 over the next 3 years that have, poor information and insight on recruiting and this or that, or like, again, I don't know why I start off with the doctor analogy to go to a place I couldn't fill in everything. But, again, you're really getting that whole, that whole viewpoint. And again, this is why it's never done. You're always learning another piece about it, drawing a distinction. You're changing, they're changing. So, it is something that has to really be kept, fully and firmly up to date.
Yeah, I was going to say that evolution piece you hit on early on, where you talked about the ideal client profile for us that is no longer, because we've evolved as a company. So I think that's a good point.
And so I'm going to give a hot take.
Okay. Oh boy.
It's not going to be a hot take for you because you heard it like 100 times.
Okay.
So, and again, I'm really talking about B2B, but this will apply to B2C. The single thing I hate the most about sales, about the way sales is taught, is we teach this idea of qualification, which, outside of the fact, kind of creates a transactional relationship to begin with. I'm going to qualify you. Screw you. It's also bullshit.
Why is it bullshit?
Because qualification is not a judgment; it's a statement of fact. If you fit the profile, you're qualified. If you don't fit the profile, you're not qualified.
Yeah.
So this is why I'm a big fan of count scoring rubrics, right? Ideal client profile scoring, which is not lead scoring. There are attributes and phases, and if you hit a score, you're qualified. If you don't hit a score, you're not qualified.
Yeah.
If you fit this profile and you're working with our number one competitor, and you are a fan of the number one competitor, as a matter of fact, you're so much of a fan of the number one competitor, you're on the hero image of their website. Fan. And they have zero interest in working with you. And you're looking at them and saying, they're never going to work with us. They're not disqualified.
Why are they not disqualified?
Because they're qualified. They meet the criteria of a company that should and could be working with you. Now, they're not a prospect, right? But you fit or you don't fit. Like,
yeah,
this whole thing comes, salesperson, well, they're disqualified. Why are they disqualified? They don't want to talk to us.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, now, by the way, I'm not saying that's necessarily sales' job to get. I think more than anybody else, that's marketing's job.
Yeah.
Right? Marketing is, okay, well, I think people forget that the reason we have sales and marketing is because people were doing things different than what we wanted them to do. And so we had to influence the course and speed they were on. So when a sales sales rep comes in and says, yeah, I talked to them. They really don't have any interest. I go, great. Yeah, exactly. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
If they were ready to buy, I wouldn't need a sales team. I probably wouldn't even need a marketing team. I would need an awareness team.
Yeah.
And so that, that ideal client profile tells you. Now, here's the thing I want to know. When this company that fits our ideal client profile and they have no interest in us, I always go, okay, what are we getting wrong or what are they getting wrong? Right? There's tremendous opportunity for learning that's there.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is what connects the dots whenever we're doing sourcing, whenever we're doing scoring. So one reason why I hate lead scoring is you're scoring the lead.
So tell me more about that.
Well, the only thing you should score is the account. And this is the fundamental problem of the origination of inbound. And by the way, it took a long time for me to realize that I just thought people didn't talk about it. I always just assumed it was there. Again, I came from the sales side. But ideal client profile had no space in inbound. It was all persona. Right. So we sell to we're a website development company. We develop websites for construction companies that do general contracting, subcontracting, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Whatever else you want to do on your profile.
Right.
So we're looking for and we're talking about, multidisciplined, multi-state, et cetera. We sell to the chief marketing, like our primary persona is chief marketing officer. What inbound said was persona was chief marketing officer. So we scored on your title, chief marketing officer.
Yeah.
We scored on activity. What did you download? We scored on these things. And so you're the chief marketing officer. And by the way, I remember going to, I remember one of my first inbounds, Mark Robert's great presentation. He said the difference between outbound sales and inbound sales and why outbound starts off and they find people who fit, but they have no idea if they have pain.
Yeah.
Right. So we have people who fit, but we don't know if they want your service.
Yeah.
What inbound does is it finds people who fit, right? We find the pain, right? And then you figure out the fit.
Yeah.
Right? Well, so I'm a CMO for a print company.
Mm-hmm.
With a lead scoring methodology, I score high on a lead because I'm looking for CMOs.
Yeah.
Right. I am the director of direct mail, or I'm the sales support manager at the corporate construction company. When you score the lead, the CMO of the local library scores higher than the sales support administrative person at the ideal company.
Yep.
Qualify the company, never qualify the contact. Qualify the company, never qualify the contact. And companies are not interested or not interested. People are interested or not interested.
Right.
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 And so whenever you do that's where you flip. I hear we're working with a company right now. They're in their target profile. They begin at $1 billion, right? And here's what the sales reps are saying. We don't have enough leads. Do you know what I say? I say that's bullshit. As a matter of fact, here's what I can tell. And I told this company this the other day. I told their marketing person. I said, any lead that you generate that's a net new lead of an account, right? And actually even a person.
Yep.
But more of an account. Good job. Kudos. I'm glad you did it. It's important to find that, but realize you covered a mistake. Right?
How so?
You made a mistake. How so? Do you know much about $1 billion companies? Here's my question. How many $1 billion companies are hiding?
Not a lot.
Right. I can, and especially $1 billion companies in a segment of manufacturing. I don't want to talk too much about the client, but it's a segment of manufacturing.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a manufacturer doing $1 billion. You know what I know about manufacturers? They have really big buildings. Have you ever noticed that? Especially $1 billion manufacturers.
Yes.
They have a lot of big buildings. They do not hide themselves very well. There is absolutely positively no reason whatsoever that if you're customer centered at all, that your sales organization shouldn't be able to identify every single company that fits. They come back, well, there's no real good research in the industry that defines. I'm like, okay, well, your salespeople are your research. Guess what, salespeople? Identify the companies. I hate using wartime analogy, especially right now. I hate using it, but it's like,
Yeah.
Why do we send out reconnaissance?
Yep.
Right. And by the way, think about this. There's no trade association that can tell us what our TAM is directly. Okay, great. So if you go actually source it, you got, like, when I was a sales rep, my job was to know my damn territory. And that meant I knew the companies, I knew the people, I knew who was who and what was what. And so I should be able to identify those people.
Yes.
Right. And then we're just like, and by the way, I see this all the time. I don't mean to pick on this company. They're implementing account-based marketing. Guess what? In account-based marketing, there is no lead generation. There might be there's lead penetration.
Right.
Right. But, and the thing is, if your ideal client profile isn't clear, then you can't identify who's who, what's what, because you don't know what makes people different. It's all too broad. And so I need to wait to find you. And here's the thing, like a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, we could wait for a salesperson to say, so tell me about your company.
Yeah.
What are some of the problems that you're having?
Yeah.
Right. A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, that kind of worked. Never worked as well as people thought it did, but it didn't kill you. Today, if you start off and you say, so tell me about your company, and you're talking to anybody that matters, so tell me about your problems. No, I'm sorry, you misunderstood. And this whole thing about, I want to buy on my own. Yeah. If you're going to come in and say, tell me about my company, tell me about your problems. Yeah. I don't want to talk to you. You're negative value.
Right.
I just as soon go through the self-serve aisle in the grocery store.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
No, you're here to tell me about my problems. You're here to teach me. Yep. Right. You can't do that if you don't know who your ideal client profile is. And you 100%. Can't do that if your ideal client profile is everybody. And you can't figure out where should the friction be? Where should the friction not be? If you don't know who your ideal client profile is. Like I'm dealing with a situation with somebody, and this is a $4 billion company in the insurance space. I'm coaching somebody on this. They're in the insurance space. They've gotten to $4 billion to multiple acquisitions, et cetera. I asked the salesperson, who are the relevant players in the process that we've identified, and I was given 3 people. Who else? That's all that I'm aware of. Okay, you know what I know? We do not know this customer. We don't know this company. We don't know this segment, because what I know is there are more than 3 people that are going to be involved here. Well, they haven't told me anything. Right, exactly. If I know my ideal client profile and I know, hey, okay, so insurance companies go here. This is the orientation and the structure of that. Oh, so who oversees sales operations? Who manages this? Who does this? You're building out the role players. Jeff Toole calls it the cast of characters. I call it the role players, the lineup, right? You got to fill in your lineup card. Well, if I don't know what the lineup card is, and this is where I see managers complain about salespeople all the time. They're not picking it up fast enough. They're not learning. Well, if I don't know what the profile is, I don't know what I'm missing. Right? I say this all the time. That one of the biggest differences between great salespeople and not great salespeople is great salespeople hear what isn't said as much as what is, and see what isn't there as much as they see what is.
Yep.
But if I don't know what should be there, I don't know what's there or not there. And that's why ideal client profile is so important. And that's why it's different than persona, and it's different than segmentation, because personas and segmentations candidly are tactical exercises. Unless, again, if you're B2C, that persona becomes, that persona is basically your ideal client profile.
Well, that was going to be one thing that I was going to ask. Is persona a piece of ideal client profile? Is it totally a separate thing?
No, it's a separate thing.
Okay.
Again, if you're B2C, truly B2C, you're selling direct to the customer. And by the way, if you do the persona right, you begin to have sub persona. They have family. This is what the family, and it almost, like that.
Yep.
Actually, we had a client that we just did this with. They did personas right. It was so sweet to hear him talk about his personas. When you're B2B, when you've got an account, they are different things. And I believe this is increasingly true, that the problem with personas comes, we begin to get personas get in the way because it's more role-based or problem-based personas. Like one of our favorite people, and that is not being said sarcastically, is in charge of marketing, right? But he so fits our sales persona over our marketing persona.
Yeah.
It's not even funny.
Yep.
And by the way, that's why we won the business with him, was because everyone else talked to him like he was a marketer.
Yep.
Right. But so the personas support the ideal client profile, but I'll also say you can't do an ideal client profile. You can't do a persona in a B2B if you don't have an ideal client profile, because I ask you, if you're the CMO of the library, of the state libraries, and yes, state libraries have CMOs, and you're the CMO of a multinational construction company, are you the same persona? No.
It's a good point. So where do you start? Where do you start with to start putting together your ideal client profile?
October 19th, 1967.
There it is.
Dark and stormy night.
Dark and stormy night. Every time.
Born the son of a sharecropper. Oh, well, actually, I'm glad you asked that, because, by the way, the other thing about your ideal client profile is it's not your best current customer description. So a lot of people say start with your best customers. And I say start with your best customers if your best customers are what you want more of. Where do you start? You start with this question. Who do we want to be a hero to? Not who likes us, not who loves us. Who do we want to be a hero to? Who do we need to be a no-brainer to? And by the way, that has to feed your economic engine, which is why in any segmentation strategy, and especially in an ideal client profile, if you ever have or more, do something that hurts yourself. Step on your toe really hard, hit yourself in the head with a baseball bat. I don't know. Do something that hurts so that you don't do that again. You have to narrow we work with companies $1 billion or more. Okay, great. I get it. You work with companies $1 billion or more. By the way, why $1 billion? Right? Because, why $1 billion? Probably because there's a certain size, which means there's a certain number of people. There's a certain level of complexity. That's where the real meat is. Right. But it's, I had one company that said we work with they were an HR company. We work, 10 employees or more. I'm like, okay, that's an ideal client profile. So so a company with 10 employees and a company with 10,000 employees, they're the same. Oh, no, they're not the same. And then someone said, well, more is better. And I said, really? So a company with 10,000 employees comes along. Someone said, oh my God, we'd lose all of our customers. We wouldn't be able to keep up. Oh, okay. 10,000 customers is not better. You know where their sweet spot was? 50 to 200 employees. Right? That's where it ended up being. And guess what?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, 50 to 200 employees, all the confusion, all the complexity, all the whatever. Right? So chalk the lines, build it, build the box. Who do we want to be a hero to? Test it. If you don't have the time to sit down and create 7, by the way, and if in doing this, you don't create at least 7 headaches, you haven't done it well.
Yep.
But that's where I start. Who do we want to be a hero to? Start and then build from there.
Cool.
Here's a question to ask. If you could only sell to one type of customer, only one, what would they have to look like? That's where we started our ideal client profile exercise, by the way, is with that question.
Cool. So my biggest takeaways are start with the who.
Who's your who?
And who's your who? Who's your who? Who do we want? And then who do you want to be a hero to? And then I think, the point of making sure that you've got that clear articulation of who it is and also who it's not, because I don't think we talk about who it's not enough when we talk about this stuff is really important. So those are my big takeaways.
And so what I would say is the way to test your ideal client profile while you're working on it is, does it start describing things that don't fit that and say,
Yep.
okay with that. Right. And again,
Yep.
It's scary. It's going to be scary. It's going to hurt. There's one question that you asked that you didn't ask that I think you should ask. Well, in the prep work.
How often should you review or modify? I thought we hit on that.
Well, we did, but we didn't hit on it in a way that's clear to everybody.
Okay. So how often should you review or modify?
If you ever have to ask yourself that question, you don't have an ideal client profile.
Okay. There it is.
And what I mean by that is, first off, like, how often do you have to review your kids?
My kids?
Yeah.
Never.
right?
Every day.
But all right,
Never and always. Yeah.
right. I mean, you never do a review.
Right.
It's always being reviewed. Like it's like if you have to go and say, okay, hey everybody, let's look at our ideal client profile. Because by the way, here's what an ideal client profile isn't: a piece of paper that says here's the attributes of our ideal client profile.
Yeah.
Right. That's not an ideal client profile. That's an ideal client profile worksheet. If everybody in the company doesn't fully understand on an everyday basis of who is our ideal client profile, like how often do you have to think about who is your friend?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And so how often are you modifying it? You're always tweaking it. Now, when you make significant changes, so like when we went from hiring your first sales rep to 5 to 15, by the way, that was a big change. And then here, so that should not, it happens frequently early, and then it should happen less and less and less frequently.
Yep.
Here's the other thing I want to say. When you change your who, you change your company.
Yep.
I read somewhere that every time you double, you break your company. The reason that's actually, I don't agree with the statement. The reason that is often true is because as your company doubles, who your customer needs to be, who are you a hero to, needs to change. That's what breaks your company. So when we went from first sales rep to 5 to 15, we had to change everything.
Yep.
Now we didn't change everything overnight. It was evolved, and we created some messes in that transition and transformation. But again, that is why, what I would say is ideal client profile is not a strategic exercise. It's a pre-strategic exercise. You can't do. It is the epitome of strategy, is what I'm saying. You can't do strategy without it.
Yep.
That's why it comes up all the time.
Yep. And most importantly, Bobby Tolan was the center fielder, and I have the full lineup as well, and all of the trades. So I'll give them to Hannah for the show notes for those of you that are interested. I got a whole lot more.
Center field. Geronimo was a better outfielder, I guess. I mean, right field was an important position.
Yeah, no, I got a whole lot of information. I have the full lineup for those of you who are interested, and he gave me all the traits from that year as well.
And so he has to be impressed that I at least knew the level of what I mean. At least that's what I'm going to tell myself tonight to help me.
Yes, I'm sure he is. And on that note, thanks everybody.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the RevOps Show. Now you know the full lineup for the Reds, and you have more knowledge on ideal client profiles. Isn't that great? I think that's great. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to go subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review and share the episode. If you have any questions you would like to ask Doug or Jess about creating an ideal client profile or anything RevOps related, email me at hannah@imaginellc.com or hit us up on Twitter @DemandCreator. Until next time, remember, can't solve your upstream problems downstream.